Luke chapter 21 is where I'll begin and introduce our lesson. Luke 21. I started out this week by saying in my first lesson that I love Jesus' style. I love all the ways he did things and said things, just all the things about him I'm enamored with. But one of the things that he was so good at that I'd like to become better at was just noticing things that other people didn't notice. And I think this passage shows us that. There's a contrast in Luke 21 between what Jesus was paying attention to and what his disciples were looking at. And listen to it here. And Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw a poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them. For they all out of their surplus put in to the offering, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on." And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, "As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone upon another, which will not be torn down." Did you notice that Jesus says in verse 6, "As for these things you're looking at," well, what were they looking at? Big, fancy, flashy things. The temple, the gold, all of that. And they're a little bit like I am, and sometimes I can be captured by the flashy things in life. I guess what I mean by that is sometimes people. I've heard over the years people talk about big name preachers, things like that. I'll tell you, to be honest, I've learned more from people you've never heard of than some of the biggest name preachers I've ever heard. And I want to just take a minute to say something about this congregation. I didn't know you before I came. I didn't really know much about this place except that Casey came down here to the deep south and I'm from the far north. I have learned that there are good, godly people of faith everywhere. And whether or not they're ever known outside of the walls of their church building or beyond their city, they serve God like this widow who gives everything to God. And Jesus pays attention to that. And so I just want to encourage you as a church, just pay attention to what's around you. It doesn't ever matter who comes through this pulpit or what one of us might say sometime when we're here. People that have given God their all can be learned from. Now, what this has to do with our lesson tonight is we're going to talk about a woman in the Old Testament named Abigail in 1 Samuel 25. And I think she sometimes gets overlooked. She's overshadowed by larger characters. David is part of that story, and we know a lot about David. Sometimes even her lousy husband, Nabal, gets more airtime than she does, depending on who's given the lesson. But Jesus was always paying attention to things like this. And God decided to put in 1 Samuel 25, if you want to go back there in your Bible, a story about this woman. And there's not a lot else about her. She will be mentioned a couple of times through Scripture, but this whole chapter is devoted to her. Now, before we get into this story, I want to tell you that I believe Abigail is a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. I think it's rare that a woman foreshadows the Messiah, but I think in some ways she does foreshadow him. And I'll try to make my case. I also believe that Abigail is a foreshadowing of the church, of us as God's people. And I'll try to make that case. There's a lot going on in this story, but I think there's some imagery that we ought to pay attention to. So let's go ahead and get into it. 1 Samuel 25, verse 1. Then Samuel died, and all Israel gathered together and mourned for him, and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel, Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail, and the woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. That David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, and greet him in my name." I'll read more here in just a minute. Now notice that the chapter starts by telling us that Samuel died. Now that's a big deal. Samuel was very important in Israel. He was loved. There was a big change that happened after he was the last judge. The people asked for a king. You'll remember that Samuel anointed Saul. And for some years, Saul was serving as king. And all that time Samuel was alive, the people still kind of looked to Samuel. Samuel still was, in many ways, leading the people, even though Saul was not doing what he should. And this is an emotional time for the nation. And it tells us that David leaves and goes to the wilderness. Now, he doesn't go alone. If you look at previous chapters leading up to this, like in chapter 22, verse 2, David had amassed an army of 400 men. He was in the cave of Adullam. And 400 losers came and spent time with David. The Bible says they were in debt, they were distressed, and they were discontent. I call it David's 3D army because of those 3D words. In debt, distressed, and discontent. I think over there in chapter 22, verse 2, David is a foreshadowing of Jesus because he was the rightful king of Israel, anointed, but not recognized. And the only people he could get around him to be the leader of were these in debt, distressed, discontented, ragtag bunch of guys. Later on, the son of David will come to his own people and not be recognized as the true king. And the only people Jesus could get around himself were those in debt, distressed, and discontent. But before this chapter, David takes that number of 400 and grows it to 600, chapter 23, verse 13. He has an army of 600 men. He goes down to the wilderness, and we'll find out here in a minute that he is policing the area. He's making sure that cattle rustlers don't come up into Israel, that Nabal's things are well watched, and he's not going to lose anything. David's doing what he can to help the nation, even though he's on the run. Now, we're introduced to two other characters, Nabal and Abigail. Nabal is described as very rich. I guess that's right. I don't measure riches with sheep and cattle and sheep and goats. He had a lot. I've got none, so I guess I'm a poor man. But he was very rich and described as harsh and evil in his dealings. Have you ever noticed that some people can get rich that way? They can get a lot by stepping on anyone that they want to step on. Sometimes they can reach not only great financial success, they can reach like the highest levels of office by being harsh and evil in their dealings. And Nabal is that man. And his wife is described in a very different way. I don't know why the Bible chooses to tell us this, but it's specific that she is intelligent and beautiful in her appearance. When I was young, some of us used to talk about, I don't know if you're ever part of this conversation, but some of us young Christian men would talk about if we could choose any woman in the Bible to marry, who would it be? And it always came down to Abishag and Abigail. Those were the two choices that we had. A lot of my friends chose Abishag because she was so beautiful that men would kill for her. I was more interested in Abigail because I wanted to be able to have a conversation with her. She's the whole package. She's intelligent and beautiful. She's everything. And she's married to this monster of a man. And the Bible says that David hears that Nabal is shearing his sheep. It's a festive time, maybe after winter. The sheep have come down with their winter coats. And Nabal is having kind of this important moment. So David sends 10 young men, and listen to what he tells them to say there in verse 6. Thus you shall say to Nabal, have a long life. Peace be to you, peace be to your house, peace be to all that you have. Now I've heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us. We've not insulted them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David." David tells these young men, hey, go greet Nabal in my name. Offer him peace multiple times. Peace be to you. Peace be to your house. Peace be to all that you have. Shalom, shalom, shalom. We're just asking for some provisions because we've helped you have a bumper crop year. You've not lost anything. Ask your shepherds. They'll tell you you've had a really good year. Just give us some of the spoils. Give us some of the proceeds. You know, that's not really unreasonable. A laborer is worthy of his hire. Maybe Nabal didn't ask for this, but David had done a service. But there's another reason why this should be compelling. The law of Moses told the rich to care for the poor. In fact, when they plowed their fields, you remember they had to plow them in a circle to leave the corners exposed. So this is not an unreasonable request of David towards Nabal. But watch what happens when the young men get there. Verse 9. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. How long did they wait? Was it 5 minutes? 5 hours? A day? I don't know. I don't know how long they waited. But have you ever talked to somebody and you knew that they heard you, but they just ignored you? Like you weren't even there. I think that's the picture here. They show up, say all these words, and Nabal just ignores them. Maybe he's trying to formulate in his mind what he wants to say to this group of losers. So here's what he says, verse 10. Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? And who's the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know?" So David's young men retraced their way, went back. They came and told him according to all these words. David said to his men, "Each of you gird on his sword." So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. Now, what did Nabal say? When Nabal looks up at these 10 young men, he says something like this: "Who is David?" And what he means by this is not, "I've never heard of him." Everybody's heard of David. They're singing songs about David that have crossed international, charts to the Philistines. They know who David is over there. Everybody knows who David is. You're going to find out in a minute. Abigail knows not only who David is, but what David's done and what's going to happen to David. Nabal is saying something like this: "Who is he to me? Do you see my success? He's just another one of you losers out here breaking away from his master. You want me to take my money, what I've worked hard for, and give it to people whose origin I do not know?" Nabal, by the way, becomes a great American in this paragraph, doesn't he? Isn't that how we talk all the time? I grew up in San Diego, California. If I'm ever homeless, look for me in San Diego. That is the best place to live if you're homeless. Weather's good all the time. You can live outside, even in a tent or not. And people go around in San Diego with their hands out down by the beach or whatever. You know what I used to think every time I saw somebody with their hand out in San Diego? I thought, you want me to take my money that I've worked hard for and give it to somebody whose origin I do not know? I mean, I identify with Nabal here. Makes perfect sense to me. Can I just tell you, next time you think that, the first time, that's the spirit of Nabal. And I know the Bible teaches principles about this. If a man will not work, neither should he eat. We're not supposed to support ungodliness or bad behavior. I understand all of that. But I just want to point out, the spirit of Nabal is sometimes what's the first thing to come out. Jesus said this: "Give to him who asks of you, expecting nothing in return." And I'll just sort of leave that there. But when these 10 young men get back to David and say, here's what he said, David is hot. He grabs 400 warriors. He puts a cloud of dust behind him on his way to Nabal's house to fight him, to destroy life. David is angry. You know, I like the way the Bible tells stories. You've got this picture of these angry men heading off towards Nabal's house. And then the scene switches back to Abigail's house. Look at verse 14. One of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us. We were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the fields. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the time we were with them tending the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household, and he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. All right, a couple of observations here. How bad does Nabal have to be for a servant in the house to be able to say, verse 17, in the house to the wife, he's such a worthless man, no one can speak to him. And nobody says, hey, don't say that. You can't say that. He's a creep. So much so that nobody even bats an eye when somebody says, your version might even say, he's such a scoundrel. Look, I don't know anything about the homes represented here tonight, but I know enough to know that sometimes in homes, even Christian homes, there are people like this. They are scoundrels who can't be talked to. And everyone in the house knows it, and everyone avoids them. And I guess I'm talking a lot to the men tonight, though it doesn't have to be true that it's a man. In your house, if there's a problem, does everybody always go to only one person in the house? I remember when I was raising my boys, it kind of troubled me. I could be in the room with those little boys, and they would call to the other room, Mom, we need help. And I'm like, I'm right here. Like, why are you calling for Mom? Now, I get it when they're little, Mom sort of does all the things. But I'll tell you what, if my boys hadn't started talking to me as they got older about things about life and never came to me, I would have needed to take stock. Is there something wrong that no one can talk to me? But in this house, they know who to go to. They know who to go to. It's Abigail. When the servant presents her the problem, he says these words in verse 17, know and consider what you should do. Now, Abigail's described as intelligent. Do you think there could have been like a fleeting thought from Abigail? My, God works in mysterious ways. Somebody's coming to kill my husband. I think it's time I go visit my sister. All she has to do in this situation is step back from the situation and let natural consequence take its course. And she delivers herself from a very difficult situation. I've known Christians that have done such things. Got into a marriage thinking it was going to be good, realized immediately it wasn't good. And I've actually heard them say out loud, I sure hope that they cheat so that I can be released. And they've even at times stepped back to try to push that. Folks, that's not what Abigail does when she considers what she should do. Look at verse 18. Here's what she does. Then Abigail hurried. By the way, it says that twice. Verse 18 and verse 23. She didn't hesitate. When she knew the right thing to do, she did it. She hurried, took 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, 5 sheep already prepared, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, go on before me, behold, I'm coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. It came about, as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her. So she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he's returned me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of any who belong to him. When Abigail saw David, she hurried, dismounted from her donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed herself to the ground. Stop there if you would. Abigail, there's an army coming to destroy your husband and all of the men of the household, and I understand that Abigail's got a lot of people to protect here. I get that. You know what she does? She turns into my grandma and just starts making food. That's what she does. You know, if men are having a bad day, make them food. She sends all this food ahead of her. That's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, it's really hard for guys to fight holding chicken legs. Like, that's hard. So she softens them up with a gift, and she comes behind the gift. But did you catch how the Bible told that? The hidden part of the mountain. It's getting dark. Reminds us of David's words, I'm going to kill everyone in front of me. Ladies, do you think Abigail was scared that day? Just think about it for a minute. Do you think she was scared that day? In a culture where it wasn't really a woman's place to do such a thing, to head off towards a man who they sang about. David is slain his 10,000. He's a warrior. You've heard about the guys that are with him in debt, distress, discontent. And here you go, all by yourself, to go face the army. Do you think in some ways she might have thought, this could be the last thing I ever do? But there they are, and she jumps off her animal, and she puts her face in the dirt, in the ground, in front of these guys. And she's going to speak in a minute. We'll read what she writes, or what she spoke. Let's stop for just a minute and make some observations. Have you ever wondered how two people like this end up married? You ever seen a couple that just didn't make sense? You've got an intelligent, beautiful, godly woman married to this man who's a drooling, successful, but ungodly man. I've met couples like this, haven't you? How does that happen? I think there's three options. Number one, maybe when they got married, they were both bad boy and bad girl. You know, maybe Abigail used to be a bad girl and Nabal was a bad guy, and they got married in their ungodly years. And Abigail decided to serve God at some point, and she straightened up her life. By the way, have you ever met a couple like that? They met when they weren't Christians. One of them becomes a Christian. One of them begins to serve God. The other one doesn't come along. Is that hard? Is that a hard situation? For sure it is. But at least on one level, the person can look at it and say, I knew what I was getting into. Like, they didn't ever say they were going to serve God. I married them back then. Maybe that's the story. Or maybe it's the second situation or second scenario. Maybe when Abigail and Nabal got married, they were both godly. I'd like to think so. Abigail's name means the father's joy. Father's joy. If Abigail was her father's joy, don't you think her father would have wanted her with a godly man? So maybe they were both godly. And at some point, Nabal, with money signs in his eyes, said, I'm done serving God and being kind. And he walked away from God. Have you ever seen that couple before? They both were serving God when they married. And one of them at some point said, I'm done. And by the way, it's not always the man who does that. I've met men who are godly and generous and kind, and their wives are mean as snakes. And you wonder about that. You know, if that first scenario is hard, the second scenario is even more difficult. Because doesn't it feel like a betrayal? When you said, I do, when we swore before God, you served God then. I didn't sign on for you to walk away. I don't want to do this in my life by myself. Maybe that was Abigail's story. Or the third scenario, which is probably most likely, is that Abigail didn't even have a choice in the matter. It was an arranged marriage. Isn't that what happened a lot back then? Marriages were arranged. She was put with a man that she didn't even choose. But even more so, wouldn't that tempt you to say something like, I didn't choose this. This wasn't my decision, and I have every right to get out of this. Folks, let's be real about this. If you took this scenario into our world today, and you said there's an intelligent, beautiful, kind woman married to a man who is mean and just awful, what should she do to be a strong woman? What should she do? What would the world say? Walk away. Kick him to the curb. Be done with him. You deserve better. But did you know God measures strength way differently than we do? Psalm 15 verse 4, in describing someone who will someday dwell with God, it says they are those who swear to their own hurt and do not change. You know what that means? Somebody makes a promise, a vow, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, till death do us part. And even though that vow, that promise, what they swore hurts them, they don't change. They keep their vow. The heart of her lousy husband safely trusts in her. I remember growing up across the street from Tom and Linda. Linda got sick and she ended up in a wheelchair. I think it was muscular dystrophy. They had 2 kids, Tommy and Monica. They were my friends. And at some point, Tommy and Monica both began to show symptoms that their mom had. We started playing baseball with like a beeping ball because they couldn't see it. Then they were riding tricycles, not bicycles. Then they ended up being unable to talk in wheelchairs. All 3 of them were sick. Tom, the dad, disappeared one day. He just didn't come home. Now, Linda's parents moved into the house until the 3 of them died. But I remember as a child, Tom, the father, still owned the house. And he would show up every once in a while with his new wife in his big truck. And I remember thinking, that's not right. You made a promise. Abigail takes her own life into her own hands to fulfill a vow that she made to the people that she was given charge of. Listen to what she says in front of David. Verse 24. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the blame. And please let your maidservant speak to you and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my Lord pay attention to this worthless man Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. Now let this gift which your maidservant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who accompany my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant. For the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you all of your days. Should anyone rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord does for my Lord, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause, and by my Lord having avenged himself. When the Lord deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant." Folks, what do you think of that speech there? What do you think? I think she's so humble. Her face is in the dirt, and she's saying things like 6 times, I'm your maidservant. 14 times, my Lord. And she's reasoning with him in a way that you and I should always use as a model. We should use this as a model. If you ever go to somebody who you know is godly, like David, a man after God's own heart, but they're about to do something ungodly, or they're in the midst of doing something that they shouldn't be doing. You ever had to appeal to somebody to get their attitude right, their heart right, their life right, and you know that they know better? This is the speech. Did you catch what she did? She says, do you remember what you've done? She refers to the sling. She reminds him of the good and the faithful times. She speaks of the present as if it's already going to happen. God's kept you from avenging. She assumes the best in this situation. And then she talks about the future. Someday, David, God's going to put you on that throne, and you're going to look back and you're going to be grateful that you didn't do this in this moment. What a brilliant speech. But there are 2 things that she said in this speech that I don't like. I'm just being honest. I don't like that she says, verse 24, on me alone, my Lord, be the blame. I want to argue with her. I do. Don't say that, Abigail. None of this is your fault. Have you guys heard that term that we use nowadays, victim blaming? You ever heard that? This is literally the victim blaming the victim. And it sounds weird. What we would tell somebody who is talking like this is, don't talk like this. Tell the truth. This is not your blame. This is his blame. Yet she's saying, blame me. That's not quite as troubling as what she says in verse 28. In verse 28, she said, please forgive the transgression of your maidservant. What transgression? What sin has Abigail committed? Do you remember I told you that I think Abigail is kind of a foreshadowing of the Messiah? Do you hear it here? Long before Jesus stood between the wrath of God and us and said, on me alone be the blame. I'll take the sin. I'll become sin for them. You had people like Abigail who knew that that's what love meant. Love meant taking the blame. Love meant making the sacrifice. Love meant, like Moses, between God and the Israelites when they were coming out of Egypt and God was going to destroy them, Moses stepped in front of them and said, me, not them. Folks, what would change in the world if everyone started having the Spirit of Christ like this? In your family, in your church? What if in the church people didn't say, it's the preacher's fault, it's the elder's fault, or the elders didn't say it's the member's fault? What if everybody said, I know whose fault it is, it's my fault? We'd be getting somewhere. I mean, if the headlines tomorrow in Washington, D.C. say, somebody on this side of the aisle stood up and said, we know what the problem is. It's us. And all of the people on that side of the aisle said, he's right, it's us. And the other side of the aisle said, no, it's us. Folks, we would be doing great in this country. But we don't talk like this. Because the Spirit of Christ is a hard spirit to live. And yet here's this beautiful woman saying such things. You ever wondered what David was feeling during all of this? Look at verse 32. David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord God of Israel who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discernment. Blessed be you who've kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. Nevertheless, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had come quickly to meet me, surely there would not have been left to Nabal until the morning light as much as one male. So David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and granted your request." I want you to notice a couple of things David says here. First of all, who does he bless first in verse 32? Who does he bless first? Blessed be God who sent you to meet me, and blessed be you in your discernment. Folks, you just read the same story I did. Did you see anywhere in the story where God sent Abigail miraculously or in a vision? Did God come to Abigail and say, "Abigail, go"? What does David mean, "Blessed be the Lord who sent you this day to me"? I think we're afraid to talk like this. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk like this. Did you know every time somebody does the right thing, anybody, any human does the right thing, do you know who should get the praise? The God who told us what the right thing to do was. I could say, "Blessed be you who came this night to hear me preach." You could say, "Blessed be you who came to preach, who God sent to preach." And what we mean by that is not there's something miraculous going on. What we mean by that is God is the author of everything good. The only reason Abigail knew what was right and good was because the God of heaven said so. Blessed be God who sent her to help him. You know, he does two things in this reading. He credits Abigail with keeping him from avenging himself. Did you catch that? "You've kept me from bloodshed." Did you see that? But did you notice what he said in verse 34? He credits God with restraining him from harming her. I find that interesting. He says, "Abigail, you've kept me from harming people beyond you, but God kept me from harming you." I don't know what this means. Maybe David, when he saw her coming, was so furious that he grabbed his sword, but God wouldn't let him get it out of the sheath. I don't know. Or if God said, "David, just listen to the woman." Whatever it was that God did to keep him from harming her, gave him enough time to hear her. Next time somebody comes at you, and you don't like that they're coming at you to correct you, to say that you shouldn't be or you ought not be living or talking or doing something in such a way, and you want to take their head off, could you remember this story? Let God restrain you from harming them, because they may restrain you from harming yourself and everybody else around you. And David says, "Thank you. Go your way. Go in peace." Look at verse 36. Then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. But in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him so that he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. You know, when Abigail gets home that evening, again, ladies, I'll ask you this. Do you think she's tired after a day like this? All the food she prepared, all the writing she did, all the fear in her heart, all the dirt on the front of her, the mascara running down her face if they wore that back then. She drags herself into the place, and what's her husband doing? What's he doing? He's partying it up with his buddies. No idea what this beautiful woman has done for him. Do you know what a lot of women would have done? They'd have gone into the room, smacked him in the back of the head, and say, "Do you know what I did for you again?" She doesn't do that. She goes home, sees him, and goes to bed that night. And I hope she slept well. Some of you have been Abigail to your spouse, whether you're a man or a woman, or your kids, or your parents, or your friends. You've tirelessly served them, protected them, loved them, hoped for them, and they've never once even noticed. They've never said thank you. But can I tell you that in this story, the righteous should always sleep well knowing that God's paying attention. Thank you for what you do, but even if you never hear it, do it. That's who Abigail was. I don't understand the next day. When he comes out of his stupor and she tells him what happened, I don't really understand what it means that his heart became as a stone within him. I don't know if that was a stroke, heart attack, or whatever. But I will tell you this, God gave him 10 days. 10 days before he took his life. I'm not preaching this sermon to tell you that if you wait long enough, God's going to rub out your lousy spouse. That's not why I'm preaching this lesson. It's not. But I am preaching it for this reason. Number one, if you are Abigail in a situation, don't give up. Do what's right. Because even when you will not take vengeance into your own hands, God has always said this. Vengeance is His. He will repay. Don't give up. You never know what could change. But if you're the Nabal in this story, if you've had family that have been trying to win your soul and you've been resistant, could I tell you, you better figure it out. You might only have 10 days left. I don't know. But one of these days, God's going to make it right. And we all are praying and hoping that you'll make it right before then. Do you remember how this story ends? God does what Abigail wouldn't do and takes Nabal's life. The Bible goes on to say that David hears about it. David hears that Nabal is dead. He praises God for the vengeance that he didn't take. And then he sends for Abigail. I mean, it makes sense. She kind of gave that little wink and a nod back in verse 31. Hey, someday just remember I'm here. If circumstances change. David remembers this intelligent, beautiful woman that was good for him, sends for her, and who does she become? Who does she become? The wife of the anointed. And in that way, she foreshadows us. Someday, we shall see the King. And if we live faithfully, at risk to ourselves, in sacrificial love for those around us, not seeking our own vengeance, but being faithful to God, even when everyone else around us is not. Don't miss that. David's doing the wrong thing, her husband's doing the wrong thing, and she doesn't say, I'm just going to be like them. She says, I'm going to be better than them. Someday, people like that will be the bride of the King. I hope you'll remember Abigail. She's one of my favorites. But she's a lot like our Savior and a lot like us if we're faithful. We offer you a chance to get your life right. If you need our prayers, if you'd like to become a Christian, please let us know while we stand and sing together.